It's being live streamed, so really we're speaking to millions.
So, we're here to represent an organisation called Outvertising, which some of you may have heard of, many of you won't have done. We're an organisation that represents LGBTQ plus people in advertising, both in terms of helping those people feel safe and comfortable in their roles and in their jobs, and also helping that wider industry create content that's representative of that community, and really a broader range of diversity as well. Personally, I used to work at Cadbury's, I've done Cara, I've done Diageo, now I work at GSK. So I've worked largely brand side. We're going to come and introduce some other people later. We've got some different perspectives from an agency side, sort of media ownery almost side as well. And we're going to just spend, hopefully, maybe 10 minutes, go quite quickly through some upfront thoughts, and then we're going to have a bit of a kind of conversation about the right way of working in this space. So why do we exist? Well, I kind of covered it to an extent, but it's to promote the fair and accurate representation, to ensure there are positive role models out there, to remove prejudice, and to provide support and information to people working in the industry. And why are we here today? Well, it's 50 years since Stonewall, which many of you will be aware of was kind of the first Pride, but it was very much a riot. So 50 years since people took to the streets of New York to really, really demand a degree of equality. And during that past 50 years, the advertising industry has kind of often failed to represent, or not really sure how to represent LGBT people within its comms, and not been sure kind of the right way of doing it. When some brands started doing it in early days, they very much were willing to advertise to queer people, but only in queer spaces, only in queer titles, to kind of avoid the risk of anyone outside of that community seeing that they were daring to do this. It wasn't really until the 90s until things kind of started to change. Arguably the first kind of mainstream TV ad was in the States, was a piece that IKEA did, a fairly casual piece. It just happened to include a gay couple looking through the store, and that was, at the time, a very, very radical move. And, they were nervous about it. In fact, as it got a lot of criticism, and in many ways IKEA backed away from it, and they said, we're not trying to make a big statement, we're not trying to make a big stand, it's just, happens to be some people, we're not standing up for things. And things have definitely changed a lot since then. There are definitely a lot more ads that include LGBTQ people in some way, often really powerfully telling their stories and bringing to life some different perspectives, so that I guess, when I grew up as a kid, there really weren't any I could see on telly, and nowadays there are a lot more. Even brands doing things like changing their logos to be rainbow colours. Yes, it's easy to say that's quite an easy gesture, it's rainbow washing, and we can come and talk about some of that, but it is still a big statement, especially for some of these brands, which are big global brands. When they do this, they usually get a lot of backlash, a lot of people, tweeting back at them, telling them, why are you doing it? It's not the sort of easy win that it's sometimes portrayed as. Absolutely, sort of brands march in and take part in pride parades, often as a way of encouraging and supporting their own staff within the community. And Ed will talk a bit from a perspective of working at Pride in London about the ways that brands are increasingly getting involved and frankly allowing those organisations to exist. And so we've come a long way. We still definitely have a long way to go. There is still definitely more we could do. I guess our sort of sales pitch of the talk is this Outvertising guide, which if you Google or go to outvertising.org, you'll find. And this is a guide that we produced this year that includes some best case studies on kind of which brands are doing this right. It includes some advice on how you approach it, the opportunities, the pitfalls. And we think it's a really interesting way for agencies to get started. And we've also been starting to do a bit of a roadshow in many agencies and increasingly brand side, if any of you are interested in having someone come in and talk to your team. And our aim is to provide everyone the opportunity to achieve kind of two key big things. And one, I guess it's kind of one of the reasons we're here, is to create effective advertising. We don't lose sight of that. None of you who work in marketing, well, some of you do, but most of us don't work for charities. Most of us work for companies who need to make money, and even charities have to be effective in their advertising. And also, though, we do want to influence culture, because advertising does influence culture, and what we portray in our adverts and the kind of people we show and the kind of environments we choose to show and the stories we tell do influence culture. And we talk about effective advertising. There's loads and loads of really great stats. Don't need to read them all out, but actually adverts which are designed to show LGBTQ plus equality are really well received, not only by that community, but by wider audiences. Progressive ads are 47% more likely to be effective. 3 out of 4 tested LGBT-themed ads outperform generic ads in driving brand recall. There's something here that when you do this right, it's not just a nice, right thing to do. It can drive effectiveness for your business. But at the same time, there is an opportunity to influence culture, and I think living in London and UK and marketing, it's very easy to think that, and absolutely things have come an awful long way. I'm standing here at this conference and I'm able to present this. But 58% of LGBT workers, when they first go into work, they hide their sexuality. They're not comfortable with being who they are in the office. 2 in 5 trans people and 3 in 10 non-binary people have experienced a hate crime because of their gender identity. It's definitely not safe, even in a big city like London, being one of these really persecuted minorities, and certainly as an industry which touches the globe, there are of course many markets where things are much, much worse. And advertising has a role to play in that. And we'll talk a bit conversationally about it, but just to flick through some of the practical steps in terms of how you want to approach that, we really recommend starting within. It's really great that a lot of advertisers do want to try and play in this space, but sometimes they can do it in quite a blunt way. They can make mistakes. They can do things which actually end up insulting as many people as they try and do the right thing for. So it's a really good idea to start testing the ad with the community you're depicting. Maybe you have an internal organisation within your business you can turn to, or otherwise organisations like ourselves, like Stonewall, like Mosaic, are always really interested and willing to work with creatives and brands to sort of sense check ideas and get you feedback from kind of the different communities you might want to include in it. Absolutely, we always kind of say think 360. The kind of changing a Twitter logo is a nice thing to do, probably. But what are the ways of really bringing it through the line? I think Skittles has done a fantastic job over the last couple of years of saying, around the Pride season, the rainbow that matters is the Pride flag, and therefore they've taken it off their packs, and they're not just doing that on their profile or online, but they're doing it really right through into store, and of course, driving sales through a successful promotion as part of that. Be prepared. I hinted at it, but it's not always easy. Here's an Adidas post for Valentine's Day implying 2 ladies in a relatively subtle way, and they get a lot of kickback. Nearly every time a brand moves into this space and does something in this space, certainly in the UK, but really everywhere in the world, they get pushback, they get challenged. And I think the well-prepared brands know what to do with that. They know how to respond, they know how to reply. There's some great examples of taking that hate and turning it back and putting it out into the community. And I think there's some bad examples where brands have sort of got nervous and stepped back and started apologising. You've seen brands, there was a bank that can remain nameless in the UK, but they changed their app to be a rainbow logo, which was a nice step, and then they apologised to everyone who complained, like, I'm really sorry that we've put a rainbow on your phone. If you want to do that and make a stand by it, and if you don't. And I also think long term, like we obviously do talk and focus a lot about Pride and the summer season. There's a whole ways of engaging this community and telling really authentic stories throughout the year. Many of you might have seen the new Renault Clio advert, which is just very casually tells an LGBT story and it's not particularly associated with Pride. Or brands like Smirnoff. I used to work at Diageo, so I'm a big fan of it. But they've taken a sort of a long-term stance on this, a long-term platform. It's not just a one-off campaign they've run, but they've really started to build around this idea of labels are for bottles, not people. They have at times sponsored prides. They've at times sponsored people who help you get home safe on your nightlife out in London. And they're really trying to think of kind of long-term ways of playing in that space. But of course, watch out. You can be too stereotypical in the wrong direction. You can be quite tokenal. It's easy for brands to get accused of pink washing. M&S made an LGBT sandwich and it divided people's opinions, as many people thought it was a great step, as thought it was a shameless cash-in. It can be hard to actually kind of work out the right balance. And again, we're here to try and help you with that. And then one last topic to sort of get us thinking before we sit down and chat is around this idea of brand safety. And I come at this more from a media side. I've got a media agency and I work at a media team in my business. And therefore kind of the brand safety side is what really I focus on in my day-to-day role. In what sense, you might be asking? Well, there's a reality that hate is on the rise again. That image of a lesbian couple attacked on a bus, probably many of you have seen that. That was, a horrific hate crime. We could probably update this entire slide with things that have been said over the last 2 weeks in the general election campaign, but it's certainly true that whereas, once we thought the world was just getting to a better and more loving place, hate crime is genuinely on the rise again. And brand safety is a way to try and help this. Brands, if they're not careful, accidentally pay for hate speech. Brands accidentally fund fake news, and they accidentally have adverts that run on far-right extremists and all sorts of places they shouldn't be. And so quite rightly, brands are trying to take actions to stop that. They're trying to make sure they do not appear on spaces that they shouldn't be and wouldn't want to support. But there's an unintended dark side to that we've uncovered, or people have uncovered. And Vice, for instance, did a study and kind of did a tell-all about advertisers on their platform, and they pointed out that terms such as gay, Muslim, Asian were the most blocked by marketers. They ranked higher than words like murder and rape. Marketers, not wanting to be, in any way undangerous, so, let's just remove all content that has the word Muslim in. Let's remove all content that has the word lesbian in, because that can get you to a dangerous place. A study by this organisation, Check, found that more than half, 57%, of neutral or positive stories on major news sites are incorrectly flagged as unsafe. Places that should be perfectly safe for brands to advertise, but are just not. And in particular for LGBTQ content, that's 73%. Nearly 3/4 of those stories are unmonetizable. And Vice's point was, when you see that, they realise that if they write a story, a positive, totally safe story about that community or ethnic diversity or a whole range of different topics, so many advertisers are skipping over that site and not advertising on it, but it's not commercially viable for them. And similarly, publishers who are dedicated just to work in this space, of course, have even bigger challenges. And of course, without funding from advertisers, minority voices will disappear. If we don't find ways of supporting media titles in this space, they vanish and they're not there anymore. So I guess the question, our starting point is to say, how can we avoid the risks? How can we be positive with this opportunity? What are some of the great ways in which brands are working in this space? And what are some of the things that, whatever your role in this room is, that you can be a part of that on? I'll pass over to Ed, who's going to lead us in our more chatty part of the day.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Welcome, everybody. And I guess we'll kick off with a quick introduction so you've got a rough idea of who we are. Jerry, I'll start at your end, as you've had a quick intro already.
So I'm Jerry, and if you've been paying attention for the last 15 minutes, I was the one talking.
Great stuff.
You were only meant to take 10.
It was roughly 10.
I'm Chris. I'm CEO of Brand Advance.
Hi, I'm Joanne Oatts. I'm a freelance creative director, mainly in creative and digital agencies.
And I'm Ed Weller, and I'm a sponsorship consultant for IngenuIT, but I also work on behalf of Pride in London on their new business team. So we're going to kick off with just some general conversational points, I guess, around all things LGBT marketing. I guess my first question would be to the group, whoever wants to field it first. What's your favourite campaign that you've worked on in the space?
I have to say, having worked in so many agencies over the last sort of 10, 15 years, I've never had the opportunity as a woman to ever work on any LGBT campaigns. And that I find very upsetting, because it's not just about the actual campaign being an inclusive campaign, it's about asking for a diverse group of voices and opinions. And that's where I think that the agency world really falls down. But so that's my answer to your question, but more to say on that. But
I feel like I'm plugging my own company, but we did a campaign where so it's for International Transgender Day of Awareness, and we transitioned all the Alexas in the world to Alex. So basically on that day, Alexa became a male transgender voice, and it still works now. If you go to your Alexa and say, open the voice of trans, it'll transition. I'm really, even as a gay guy, I didn't really know very much about transgender or non-binary, and I'm sure lots of people say there's something new to learn every day, a new identity, and that's fine. However somebody identifies, we should just go along with it. It's not going to affect us. But I think that campaign, because I didn't realise there's 25 million transgender people in the world, and there is a transgender person attacked every other day somewhere in the world. So it was good to be part of a campaign that really highlighted something that myself or the team, and Joe, trying to not catch my eye there, he worked on it as well. But yeah, that's one I worked on.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about the Smirnoff campaign. I did do some work on, and to be anything though, the campaign, I've had very little to do with it, but during my time at Diageo, that really inspired me was Guinness did a piece with Gareth Thomas, the rugby player, and in a way it's easy for Smirnoff to do it because Smirnoff is party culture, it's drinks, it plays naturally into that kind of out there space, but Guinness is kind of full on like manly rugby culture, and being brave and bold enough as a brand to just be willing to kind of tell a very honest story about Gareth Thomas's coming out, and then to support him a little bit over the last year or two when he was diagnosed with HIV, and they did a few sort of tactical bits with him there. That for me was almost a bigger leap, because you can see that they will have got more pushback from their kind of core audience for doing it.
I find that quite interesting that all of those briefs that you guys have worked on have all come through as an LGBT brief.
Yeah.
I think that's quite a big point, and how much of it is down to the agencies that are representing these brands to push back on their brand clients and say, well, you're running your Christmas campaign, should you be including an LGBT element in that? Jerry, as the man issuing the brief, I'm afraid to pick on you a little bit. Where do you think that lies? Do you think that should come from the brand?
I work in the media team, so we brief more on the media side of things, though we don't always push hard enough on the need for diverse media in our briefs. I think that's a thing we're trying to really tackle. And with another hat on, I'm also part of this thing called the Conscious Advertising Network, and that is really encouraging advertisers to understand that where they spend their money funds the content that's out there. So maybe we should make sure we're spending more on voices we want to exist and less on ones we don't. I think absolutely from a brand side, I think those are all examples of like deliberately LGBT focused campaigns. Probably in an ideal world, those can be the minority, because there are, the idea doesn't have to be, I'm telling an LGBT story. It can be I'm telling a story that could perfectly easily be, done by anyone. It just happens that we've chosen actors or actresses, etc., that tell that story. So I think there's a balance, but I think I have definitely heard agencies saying, when they do bring slightly out the box ideas and they do bring, well, we could take it down this direction, clients can be very nervous and can be wanting to revert to a safer line. So of course there's huge responsibility on clients, because no one can do it unless we say yes.
But I think there's a really important thing to say. I was recently working on a major household name brand, and my partner and I presented some work which included some LGBT elements to it, but that wasn't part of the story. It was just and there was some pushback, and it was a real struggle to try and say this you're talking to the whole of the UK here, and these people are the whole of the UK as well. Let's not go down a route that we were in 20 years ago. So it is incredibly hard. So
I would say, I'm trying not to be controversial.
Why?
I know, I'm a bit gobby. I would say there's a commercial reason for it. Let's just strip away that it's, I've got sweaty pits, so sorry if I'm moving weird.
There's the controversy.
We all have jobs, and then jobs need to, get paid by wages. So let's just strip away the goodness of doing it, or that it is for the good of society. £81 billion is the consumer spend of LGBT in the UK. $1 trillion is the consumer spend of LGBT in the US. That is people that have actually ticked the box when they do the census that say, I am LGBTQ+.
So
look at Gen Z. Sorry, I've got a few more stats to chuck. Look at Gen Z. 46% of Gen Z do not identify as heterosexual. So already, and this time next year, Gen Z will amount to 1/3 of all consumer spend. So taking that already, so there's big pockets of money, massive pockets of money that can be dipped into by including LGBTQ in your marketing. And then, like we've said as well, the voices, we're all on our Facebook and on our Twitter moaning about politics here, politics on the other side of the pond. Voices now need to be heard as much more as they did 50 years ago in Stonewall.
A hugely valuable audience and a very influential one.
Well,
I think
yeah.
A reasonable argument.
Does
that mean that every brand has the right to play in that space?
I think Well, yes. If a brand sells a product, then it has the right to sell that product to any demographic in the UK. You know, I'm a black gay guy. I want you to give me contextually relevant advertising, contextually relevant to my blackness or mixed ethnicity, contextually relevant to my gayness, contextually relevant to the fact I'm a father of 2 teenagers. You know, come at me with stuff that I see myself in a place where I would visit that's other people around me. Sorry, I know I'm taking loads of time. I've got one more thing to say. There's 2 ads. So Land Rover, same-sex couple in a Land Rover in an ad. That ad in the metro, I don't think it's selling me a Land Rover. I can afford to buy a Land Rover, but I don't think it's selling me one. I think, is that big of me?
They do finance packages now.
I think it's telling the straight person sat on the tube next to me that Land Rover accepts gay people. Stick that exact same ad in Gay Times, and I think you're selling me a Land Rover, because it's contextually relevant media. You've got no statement other than to sell to me with something that you know is relevant about me.
I disagree with that. I'd say that's arguably pinkwashing. If you put that commercial only in the gay press and a straight couple in the straight press, then you're...
No, I'm saying put it in both. You know, like tell the person next to me that Land Rover is, you know, an advocate for LGBTQ people. Yes, of course, but also come and advertise to me in my press or in an environment that's contextually relevant.
I think that demonstrates one of the things that is important to me is that when I'm working on any brief, that the research and the thought's gone into the insight and the strategy to think, you know, are we getting the right heads on this? Have we got a diverse range of people working on this? If we're targeting a particular demographic. And that's a real problem within agencies. It's like you could be working on an LGBT brief, but you look around the agency and it's not an inclusive, diverse thing. So there's definitely some work to do there, I think.
And I think as well, it's sort of having that network. You know, every agency is going to take a while to get to any kind of diversity level that's really going to represent society. Let's
and
be
any
honest.
brand as well, though. I mean, the problem trickles up all the way to the top of the funnel, and I think it goes back to sort of the point on if any brand can play in the space, well, yes, but they need to be considering who's actually put together in the room that comes up with the brief in the first place.
Yeah, because it's about listening to people's stories and listening to people's experiences. We all live in bubbles, media bubbles, advertising bubbles, London bubbles. And if you don't hear stories outside of that, I mean, that's one of the reasons we started doing the podcast, the Outvertising podcast, available on Spotify and Apple. Thank you. You can go onto it. And it's about sort of, you know, within advertising, people we work with telling their stories, because everybody's got a really interesting story to tell. And, you know, if you're someone who doesn't know many LGBT people, or there's not a network in your agency, then you need to go out and listen to people's stories, and then you have a bit more of an understanding of how to talk to them through your marketing.
And then the giant elephant in the room of it, of course, is they have a particularly anti-LGBT history.
Yeah, I mean, there is a challenge. I mean, from a corporate side, there are lots of companies that would like to sort of, you know, jump into this space, but if you haven't kind of got your ducks in order internally, like if you haven't got policies in place internally that, you know, help your own staff,
there's a lot of brands get in trouble for.
Yeah, or if you have a history for whatever reason as a business, or having played badly in this space, I think, you know, quite rightly, brands do get called out and challenged, but I think at the same time, obviously, people have to start somewhere. And I think it'd be a shame if, you know, brands that wanted to sort of positively move into this space and, you know, the full spectrum of diversity, where, you know, we're too scared because of the kind of the backlash that they might get. But that, you know, that is a reality. Like the M&S example I gave earlier, you know, they were trying to do the right thing. Their internal LGBT organisation was actually really, really proud of it and had lobbied really hard for it and thought it was like amazing they got it out there. And then a lot of people kind of piled on and said it was quite tokenistic, which is, you know, in any market, I guess people are going to have different strong opinions, and there's not any sort of one easy answer. But I think for them, it's helpful if you can tell a more holistic story and be clear. And I think it's the point Chris always makes. At the same time, you know, advertising the LGBT community doesn't necessarily have to be charitable. You know, it doesn't have to be like, you know, I gave X amount of money to a charity because I wanted to talk to you, in the same way that, you know, when I'm advertising to housewives and kids, I wouldn't feel like I have to support a housewives charity to be allowed to do that. They're obviously, you know, there is
if you need to build your credentials, it's a very quick way of doing so.
Yeah, you need to build your credentials in an honest way. And if you are tapping into purpose and claiming a big purpose, maybe you do have to put some of that stuff in there. But if you're just trying to appeal and represent and be relevant to that audience, not every campaign has to be a sort of charitable campaign, from my perspective.
It just have to be authentic, and you get that by listening to the authentic voices of the people you're talking to. I think that's the problem.
Yeah. And I think, going back to what you just said, it does help, but it doesn't help if you only did it when you were going to put out this campaign.
And you're putting 40 grand's worth of activation behind it as well.
Absolutely.
Agree.
But the rest of your,
with my pride in London.
him, you sat on £1 billion worth of media spend a year, but only 100 grand is going on LGBT.
It's nearly the end of the December, you don't have to be friendly
we're putting
anymore.
up stats saying there's 81 billion. Why is 100 grand going to tap you into 81 billion? So I think there needs to be consideration, I think, as we move forward. And it's not just LGBT, it's BAME, it's disability, it's 50 plus. There's a whole load of demographics that, take 50 plus. They are over half of all consumer spend in the UK, yet only 5% of advertising spent on them. There's lots of these disparities between the size of consumer, and everybody's chasing Gen Z, they're skint. Everyone's chasing millennial, they're skint, But the actual demographics that have money, LGBT, excess money, because...
Often that's because they don't want to see their brand worn by those people, and find a lot of the time. But
I don't know if it's that. I just think advertising's got easy. There's mainstream and then there's the others. And the others feel more difficult to actually speak to than mainstream. And, in all honesty, mainstream is straight and white. And everything else is another or a niche. Even in this city, it's niche marketing, yet 57% are BAME in London. But it still would be deemed in any agency meeting as niche advertising,
What's really interesting is that quite a lot of the time it's down to time and money. So people go for, there's a lot of wallpaper advertising out there that does nothing and means nothing. And so, it takes a bit of investment and time to get something really good. And everyone's trying to cut costs, do things quicker for less and more for less and all this sort of thing. But, if you really engage an audience that hasn't been engaged before, you're going to have cut through, like not a lot of advertising does at the moment.
Yeah.
So.
And I think picking up on that, sorry, were you going to say something?
I was going to, Joanne, it's interesting when you talk about intersectionality and all the different kinds of diversity, like when sometimes some of the, people who make Christmas adverts, it ends up feeling a bit like a sort of pick and mix of like every scene is like a different kind of stereotypical diversity. We've ticked a bunch of boxes.
Yeah.
How creatively do you make sure you don't end up in that sort of very
it goes back to the story. I mean, if you're telling a story where that's relevant, then fine. I mean, go back to the word authentic, it makes sense. But if you're just literally it's a smorgasbord of like every tick box you feel like you need to tick, then everyone, whoever they are, is going to see that way. I mean, obviously it's important to have representation. That's the key thing. But the problem is with that, it's like, we'll have a drag queen and we'll have 2 young, cool-looking lesbians, or we have, we'll have all these things. But, there's a lot of other stories that could be told that could tell that story in a much, much stronger way, which would have resonance across the board.
Finish that with the worst case study I ever had in LGBT advertising, which was actually an LGBT organisation that was putting out posters, and they were casting the people to appear on the posters and exclusively wanted to hire men in their early 20s who identified as gay. Particularly disappointing. I'm going to throw it out to some questions from the room, if anyone wants to put their hand up with anything they've got.
I'll just yell it, and then you just...
Yeah, go.
Can you give some examples? It seems like this is a fine line between success and failure. What's a really shit example of doing this, of implementing this sort of strategy, and what's a good example? You said Guinness is a good example, but over the campaign, give us a good and bad example of the campaign instance?
Yes, the question there for those on the live webcast is, what's the good and bad example? The reason, so the Guinness's advert is basically just Gareth Thomas, Welsh rugby superstar, telling his very personal coming out story. And I think the reason that is good is that it played very much to sort of Guinness's strengths. Like, it's about rugby, which Guinness has sponsored for 50 years or something. Their brand positioning is kind of made of more, and people who've been through a tough journey and stood up for it. And therefore it was a very natural still very challenging to get through the organisation, I'm sure, and still controversial in many ways, but it's very natural. You know, we have a brand positioning, and we are telling an LGBT story, but in the same way that we would tell many other stories, and represent many other individual people in our adverts. And that's for me is why it's powerful. Though also he has a very powerful story. And I guess for me it's often when from a brand perspective, it's when the brief to do something in diversity is really detached from that. So you've got your main campaign, everything you stand for, and you kind of produce this like brief of we'll do something over in diversity, and we'll do it over here, and it doesn't have any of the kind of distinctive assets that your brand is famous for, any of the things that your brand normally stands for, and it's just kind of a fairly tokenistic way of putting some rainbows on something, and that for me is the kind of the risky space where I think. Well, rightly, challengingly, often you get called out a little bit, like, why have you suddenly randomly done this thing over here? Whereas, Guinness got pushback because, it was somewhat controversial, even in this time and days. But for the most part, people just really got it. They understood why Guinness was doing that. It made total sense to them. You couldn't really accuse it of, rainbow washing or anything because it was very authentic to the brand. And I think that's, for me, a big watch. Authentic to the audience and everything as well, but from a brand side, don't silo off too much. Try and make it part of the same story you're trying to tell.
Mm-hmm. And sort of research as well. I'm really racking my brain for one that's LGBT, but I can give you another one. So a brand, a top supermarket brand, put out a Christmas campaign of a Muslim family eating turkey. And then one tweet killed the whole campaign because one tweet said, I didn't realise you did halal turkey. And Tesco's tweeted back saying, no, well, sure. Yeah, we know who it is now. That unknown brand tweeted back and said, we don't. And that's just killed a campaign where there was good intention, there was money spent. It was a UK-wide campaign, but just...
The products at the bottom of it wasn't quite safe.
Yeah. And I wish I could think of an LGBT one, and I will send you one. You're on my LinkedIn.
I can't be quite as bad as that, but as Pride in London, we obviously have to put our hat on to police these brands that want to come and sponsor. They're coming with their checkbook in their hand to say we want to be part of this, and it makes it very difficult for us to turn around to a brand that has a particularly bad track record and say, well, we actually can't include you because of your awful track record and the amount of pushback you're going to get, because it will...
You've had to do that?
We've had to do that with a couple of brands that I absolutely cannot name, but they came to us, and one of them even wanted to be a headline sponsor, but because of their track record with employee relations.
But they're all owned by the Sultan of Brunei.
No. No. Weirdly, they didn't approach us, but that's an important...
Time is more or less out for us. Is there any way that we can... How do you think we can help and support brands that end up in that kind of place?
You see, that's what I think is important, and that's why I balance my volunteering with Pride with my volunteering for Outvertising, because we should be working with these brands that want to do it, even if you alluded to the Dorchester there with their famous protest outside, but a large proportion of the disproportionate representation of their staff is actually LGBT. So where would Pride in London's stance be on allowing them to participate in the parade?
Do you know, another thing I think we can do, because ask this every time, and at the end of a panel, what can everybody in the audience do better to engage LGBT or diversity or whatever it is? Do you know, I think the community could do better and not attack, I'll call it, pink washing or rainbow washing every time a brand does it. There's a first time for everything. Do you know what I mean? And if we just stood back and just before we're about to send that tweet or just about to, one of the publications is about to shout at how we haven't seen Primark ever do anything, and now all of a sudden they're marching down our street in rainbow colours. Well, at least they're marching, for number one. And if, we stopped shouting at it or so much, then more brands wouldn't,
There you go. Transformational change starts at home, everybody. We've got that.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Right.
I
in
think
LGBT homes.
Isn't every home an LGBT home? We're including allies.
True.
Here's hoping. Thank you very much, everyone. That's our time, I believe.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for paying
very much
attention.
appreciated. Thank you.